Cool. So thanks everyone for joining our FuSion Equality for Children event. I just got a note to say I'm on mute. Can everyone hear me? Can you guys hear me, Renee and Rose?
Yep.
Cool, great.
Yep.
So yes, thanks for joining. I'm Seamus Carney. I'm the co-chair of the FuSion Network, and my day job is project manager within Northern Trust Bank. I'm joined by Renee von Medding. Yes, and Gerard Kenny from Equality for Children, and they're going to give us a bit of a background on the group very shortly. My first interaction with Equality for Children myself was when my husband and I decided that we would look into intra-country adoption, and that was about 4 years ago. When we first started looking into it, we found out that adoption for same-sex couples is fully legal, and both parents would be legal guardians of that child. But what we did find out was that adoptive leave benefit wasn't applicable to male same-sex couples. So throughout the years, we petitioned various TDs and ministers. We had various groups advise that the law would change in October of last year, and that was all set and slated to happen. But unfortunately, very last minute in October 2019, they pulled it. So we're continuing to have that argument, I guess, with various ministers and TDs. What we have seen as a trend within the FuSion Network and members of the FuSion Network is that their HR departments are offering adoptive leave benefit to male same-sex couples regardless. So they're addressing that inequality themselves. But it would be great if we could get the Irish law changed and make it a bit more equal in that regard. But I know that you guys certainly have had your experience with inequality, specifically for your children and your families. So what I might do at this point is, Renee, I'll kick over to you first, followed by Rose, and just ask you guys to give a brief introduction to yourselves and your families.
Okay, thanks, Seamus. So my name is Renee, and I am Dublin-based with, and we have 2 daughters through reciprocal IVF, which means we used her eggs and donor sperm, and I carried the babies. We got married in 2016, and we'd always wanted to have kids, and you know, getting married and then having a baby right away was always going to be kind of our path in life, I suppose. When marriage equality passed, we were just in this like bubble of happiness. We you know, just were so thrilled to be in a country where we were equal, and we were just so excited to start our family, and we had no idea that we would face any challenges when it came to having kids. I suppose the first hurdle was that we weren't allowed to do reciprocal IVF in Ireland, and we were forced to go abroad. And you know, but we did that because it was really the path that we wanted to go down. So anyways, we got pregnant and came home, got married, and still were just very oblivious to what lay ahead. We just assumed, I suppose, along with most of the country, that when we had kids, we would just be treated like any other married couple. And sadly, that is and was not the case. When I was about 8 months pregnant, we found out that when our child was born, only I would be considered a legal parent because I gave birth, and my wife Audrey would have no legal connection whatsoever to our kids. And that was devastating to find that out, and just to realize the kind of predicament that we were in. And it was very, you know, disappointing to realize that we had all voted for something, and then to realize that what we had voted for was not true equality. And so I suppose that was the start of our journey with becoming active and campaigning for equality for our children. And you know, at the time we knew that there was some sort of legislation in the pipeline that would grant equality to some families, and we kind of held on to hope that perhaps we would be covered by that legislation. And we didn't really realize at the time how narrow the criteria were for that legislation. And in the years that followed, and as we spoke about this and we started doing more interviews and networking with other people in the same situation, we realized that this legislation would only cover same-sex female couples in a very certain criteria. You know, you need to tick all the boxes in order to qualify for this legislation, which has now passed. You know, and we just felt that that wasn't good enough. And we then went on to have another daughter. And after the birth of our second daughter, I suppose that's when the fire really got lit, because it was just so unbelievable to be in the same situation again with our second daughter 2.5 years later, and I was still having to register as a single parent effectively, and, you know, having to go to the registration office, you know, by myself, only having me on the birth certificate, and just to be in that situation again. And we felt that, you know, people didn't know about this, and we just really wanted to start some sort of movement where we could spread awareness and help to lobby for political change and new legislation that would cover all families and all permutations of how you get to have your children, no matter what, because, you know, equality is for everybody, and it doesn't matter how you conceive or where your child is born or how they're born. You know, that's not what. So I suppose the time that Equality for Children was born was around the time you're talking about, Seamus, when that adoptive leave was supposed to go through, and they scrapped it at the last minute in October of 2019. And that kind of created just, you know, it was already such an angry time for LGBT plus parents, and then that was, I think, the straw that broke the camel's back, and people were just like, this is not okay, this is not good enough, let's do something. So it was very grassroots, I suppose, and it just happened, and a group of parents got together and we said, let's do something about this, let's form an organization and a campaign that will look at the inequalities that our children are facing, and let's do something about it. And that's when Equality for Children was born last October. So I will stop talking now because I could waffle on for hours. That's a bit about me.
Great, thanks, Renee. Really appreciate that. Rode, if you wouldn't mind giving a little bit of background on yourself and how you got involved with Equality for Children.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Seamus. So my name is Gerard Kenny. I am a gay father. Together with my husband, Seamus, we have 2 children, a little girl called Mary and a little boy called Sean. Seamus and I met back in 2010, and we were pretty much on the same page from the very beginning about wanting to get married and to have kids. So in 2015, we had our civil partnership, and in that same year then, we began our journey towards parenthood. The path that we chose was to do surrogacy. But again, Ireland lets gay families down in this situation because there is simply no legislation whatsoever in place to protect the parties involved in a surrogacy agreement. So that meant initially for us, we couldn't even go to an IVF clinic here in Ireland, because when we called to try and make an appointment, they said, look, there's no legislation. As a business, we wouldn't be comfortable operating in that grey space. So sorry, guys, you're not welcome here, kind of was the answer, albeit very polite. So Seamus and I did a bit of research, and we then discovered that Canada offered a path to parenthood for people who wanted to have their children through surrogacy. In that, what I mean by that is there's legislation in place to protect absolutely every party who becomes involved. So we went over to Canada, we found a clinic, we met an amazing woman who'd had 3 children, She became a widow at a very young age following a car accident. And she said the thing that got her through that horrible time was her children. And she wanted to give the gift of parenthood to another family. So that lady was called Rena, and we worked with Rena to try and have our children. But for some, I still can't explain it, on unknown medical reason, the IVF failed on 4 different occasions. So we were obviously devastated. We'd spent 2 years trying to have our children, and at the end of that, we had nothing. So we regrouped, and we came up with a new plan after lots of begging, borrowing, and stealing. Well, we didn't quite steal, but we did sell some things in order to try and get the money together again for another journey. And again, this time, Ireland still wasn't in a position to help us. So a friend of mine who lives in London came forward, and she said, her name was Amara, she said she'd carry the babies for us because she saw what had happened to us over the couple of years when we were trying and failing in Canada. We used the services of a clinic in the United States for the IVF piece, and Amara carried our babies, who are, as I've mentioned, Sean and Mary. But the sad reality is, and we knew this going into it, because surrogacy, as I said, operates in a kind of a very grey space here in Ireland, in that there's no legislation. So we tried to figure out where we stood in the eyes of the law. And basically, in the eyes of the Irish law, despite the fact that Amara has no biological relationship with our children, and despite the fact that she lives in another country, the law here says that she is the legal mother of our children. Now, personally, we're not worried about Amara, but we're worried about that process, because it means that in reality, Amara could knock on our door tomorrow, because the Irish law gives the mother a preference in the case of an unmarried couple over the father. She could actually take our children away from us. That's the reality. In our family, then, it's only the biological father, because he's on the birth cert, who has a illegal relationship with his child. The other parent has absolutely no legal rights to that child, and that can never be fixed as the situation stands at the moment. So we're in a really vulnerable place, albeit that we knew we were going to be in this situation prior to conception. But that's just not right, because it puts our children in a very vulnerable position. And I can talk a little bit later about some of the things that we can't do. Like the non-biological dad cannot go to the doctor and ask for treatment for his child. He can't even pick up his child from school without a note from the biological dad. So our family situation at home domestically, we're a really happy family. We adore our children, but we're left in a really vulnerable position by the inaction of the state. They did promise to try and rectify the situations of all the LGBT family structures that exist. But as Renee said, we've been kind of left aside in various different ways over the last 5 years since marriage equality has come into place. So I got involved with Equality for Children as soon as I heard about it, because I just don't think that's right for children. And I typically act as the spokesperson representing the position of gay dads here in Ireland. So that's my situation, Seamus.
Super, thanks guys. Sounds like you both have had very, I guess, difficult situations to deal with, just by some examples you gave there, Gerald, about your local GP. I guess we've kind of touched on it already, but I guess to be a little bit more specific, why is this campaign so important to both of you?
So I guess for me, sometimes people say to us, well, it doesn't matter, you're a family and that's all that matters, and why does a piece of paper matter so much? But the thing is, that piece of paper represents the protection and the safety of the child. And as a parent, I will do anything to make sure that my children are safe and protected, and that they have the same access to everything else that their peers do, regardless of the sex of their parents. So at the minute, my children don't have that. If something were to happen to me, and if I were to die, touch wood, they would be orphaned. They would have no other parent. They would not automatically go to my wife, who is their mother. That's, I suppose, the worst case scenario. But in other situations, if we were to be in a situation where they needed consent to medical treatment, like as Garode said, with vaccinations and whatnot, if I'm not available, there is no one there to give consent. They're not allowed to freely travel with their other parent. They have to travel with me. They can travel with her if I give my written consent. They don't have access to the financial benefits of inheritance from Audrey's side of the family. There are so many implications, whether it be medical, financial, legal, social, and then that's not even before we go into looking at the psychological damage that this is doing to our families and potentially to our children. They grow up knowing that their families are treated differently. So that's why it's so important to me. We just want to have equality for our children. We want the same, no more and no less, and that's why it's so important to me.
Any additional input on that, Garode?
Yeah, I mean, Renee has summed it up brilliantly there with loads of examples of the difficult situations that arise when you have two parents, me and my husband, but only one of us is named on the birth cert. It just means that the other parent has literally no rights. So just to put it, restated in our context, if anything was to happen to the biological dad, the state would be entitled to contact the surrogate, who's not biologically related, and say to her, what does she want to happen to the children? Does she want to take them back? And if she declined, which she would in our case, then the siblings of the biological dad would be asked what would happen. So third in line would be the other parent who has been working, day and night to provide for the family, but he would actually be just the third party or the third person to be consulted about all of this. So, that's unlikely to happen. We're both young, fit, and healthy people, but you just never know where life is going to take you. But ultimately, like in my case, I just don't feel that it's right. My children are outside right now with their other daddy. He's been good enough to take an hour off work just so that I can do this conference call in peace. They're outside playing on the green. There are other children out there. We live in a small development of houses. And I just don't think it's right when I look out to think that my kids are being treated deliberately by the state differently to those other children. You become a parent, you'd literally kill and die for your kids. And it just really saddens me, genuinely saddens me, to feel that my kids are somehow being treated in less than the other kids that they're playing with right now. That's just not right. Not in a progressive country. And, where we live, everybody knows that we're a gay family. Our children are treated exactly the same by our neighbours as every other child. But our country and our government actually know that this inequality exists, but they won't pass the legislation, and that's all it needs. It's not a referendum issue, it's a legislation issue, and they won't pass that legislation to ensure that all children of LGBT families, regardless of their origins, can have the right to have a legal relationship with both their intended parents. So it's just not right from the children's perspective, and that's what motivates me.
Absolutely, and I can see why. Like from the outside looking in, looking at the pictures that I see on Instagram and the pictures that I see on social media, both your families, you both look like very happy family units. But I'm sure having this in the back of your mind constantly is bound to have some emotional impact on you. What impact does it have on both of you, both physically and mentally, in your day-to-day lives?
To be honest, I am just so tired of this fight. And if it was any other fight, I would have given up a long time ago. But, as we say, it's our kids and we would literally die for them. So there is that will stop me from this particular fight. But it's absolutely exhausting. day that there's not an hour that goes. We're reminded that we are not equal and that we need to keep fighting until we are equal. And that's on top of the normal exhaustion of being a parent to young kids. You know, we were chatting just before this call, and you know, talking about how, you know, how tiring it all is, and that's just the normal day-to-day of parenting. So to add all of this on top of it is you know, it's a fight that we never ever should have been forced into. It's not something that we should have to fight for. It should be an automatic right to our children, and it's not something that we should have had to do. And yeah, it's just absolutely exhausting, and it's I resent it sometimes for the time it's taken away from my family. It's taken me away from my family. It's taken me away from enjoying those early moments with my children, and I will never get that back. But as I say, it's something that we have to do. But yeah, it's really, really tough.
Absolutely, thank you for that, Renee. I can imagine. Gerard, what about you?
Yeah, it's similar to what Renee said. So like at the moment, our kids are twins. They're heading for their second birthday. So the things that are going on right now for us are we're registering them for their months in September of 2021, and we are registering them for primary school. We're also trying to sort out their passports, even though there's probably no option to go anywhere anytime soon. But like in those three situations, which are really normal situations and kind of generally happy situations, where your child gets its first official document from the state, or where your child gets a place in the local school with all the kids who live around them, every time we go to do one of those ordinary things, I have to tell the story, the whole background about these kids. And then I'm sitting there hoping that the man or woman who's in the position of authority, either providing the passport or doing the school registration, is going to be okay with my family, because that's the vulnerable position that we're in. And typically they are generally really nice people, but they all kind of have to say, well, I'm really sorry to have to ask this, but it can only be the biological dad who fills in that form. If you don't mind just sitting aside, that'll be great, kind of thing. That's just, it just turns every kind of big milestone into something a little bit inferior to probably the heterosexual couple who live across the road from us. So look, you asked, or you mentioned there, we do a little bit of work, Seamus, my husband, and Seamus is also called Seamus, and I on the campaign through Facebook, through Instagram, through radio shows, through TV. I really want this to change, but part of me really resents having to tell the story of my kids, because they are just that. They're just children. Their background is immaterial at this stage. They're downstairs or out in the green or wherever right now, playing like every other child, but they have a backstory that has to be told in order to try and get the rights that they deserve. So that just really annoys me. As an adult, I got involved in the marriage equality campaign, and I was willing to do that, and I was willing to take kind of the negative criticisms. But when you put your family out, as I'm now doing in this situation, people do direct criticisms at you as a family unit and at your children, and that's hurtful. But we feel in the campaign that telling our story is the only way for people to identify with us, and that's why we do it. But having to do it and having to tell your story every time you register your kids for school, or just always having to tell your story, just makes you vulnerable.
Absolutely. If I think back to when we were doing the marriage equality referendum, the constant coming out, the daily coming out, the having to retell your story, that at that time for me and my husband was extremely exhausting. So I can only imagine I can only empathize with you guys as to how you feel on a day-to-day basis. Renee, a question for you specifically. How are you treated differently than if you were married to a man?
This is actually a funny one, because I was talking to one of my best friends, gay. He was over with me yesterday, and I was just kind of trying to explain it to him because he knows all of this, but I said to him, you do realize if I had brought you to the registration office with me, I could have put you on the birth certificate as the father of Ava and Aria. And he just could not believe that. But it is 100% true. I would like to think that no one has ever done that, but it is absolutely the prerogative of a person who gives birth can walk into a registration office and put anyone down on the birth certificate, so long as they are male. If you are married, your husband has to go on the birth certificate. If you're married to a man, sorry, which is just a really bizarre situation. I could have put either one of you two, Seamus or Grode. You could have come in with me and I could have said, here's the baby daddy, and there would be no questions asked. It's a very clear situation where there's, you know, one rule for one set of people and another for another set of people. You know, I'm treated as a married woman in one sense for tax purposes and, you know, other certain things, but then when it comes to children, I'm treated as a single parent. And that's, you know, that's just not okay because I'm not a single.
I mean, that's crazy if you think about that small piece of information, the fact that, you know, any man's name can be put on, that in itself needs to be addressed for sure. Just generally then, in your work in equality for children and your hashtag Still Not Equal campaign, is there any idea, or do you guys have any idea on a realistic timeline for when all LGBT plus families will be deemed equal?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. And the answer is we don't know. We hope that it's not going to take another 5 years or another 10 years. We hope that it's as soon as possible. But, you know, the is not fantastic. I know we do have a new sort of government now, but it 5 years to get a piece of legislation that was legislation in place. It passed in 2015, but it wasn't enacted until May of this year. So it took 5 years of stalling and fixes and amendments to get that one small piece of legislation through. And that in itself is hugely flawed. And the people who created this admit that themselves, that there are so many flaws that road that, you know, it was just, well, look at everybody. So timeline wise, we are, you know, collaborating with other organizations and very much asking for a seat at the table when they look at the next piece of legislation, which would be a bill to do with assisted human reproduction. They been talking about this for years and years, and was a pre-legislative scrutiny done on the bill last year, and really what they were looking at in that bill was so unsuitable for our families, because they were really only looking at legislating for domestic surrogacy. So that would be surrogacy that takes place in Ireland. And Garode knows a lot more about this than me, but the vast majority, I don't want to put a number on it, definitely towards 90% of surrogacy in Ireland would be international surrogacy. Framework in place for the they weren't even looking at legislating for the children that already exist. So all of the children who already were born through surrogacy would just be completely left out of what they were proposing. So we would be looking to work with the government on coming up with a completely new bill that would include all families, whether it's international surrogacy, whether it's home insemination, whether it's, you know, it doesn't matter what way people have had their children, but that it would not be so consumed with conception, but it would more so be protecting the huge variety of different ways to LGBT plus parents. So the answer is we don't know how long that will take.
Can I just add there, Seamus?
Go ahead.
Yeah, just to be very clear, Renee has given a brilliant answer there. The answer is we don't know. But just to be clear for the audience, what the government have done up till now, and as she said, it took 5 years, they introduced a piece of legislation that basically specified the conditions under which a same-sex female couple can have their children and both go on the birth cert. So they said it has to be done through IVF. It has to happen here in Ireland. The sperm donor must be anonymous but traceable. The baby must be born in Ireland. And I'd love to know what would happen if our government came out tomorrow and said, for heterosexual couples now, we're introducing a piece of legislation that tells them when and where and how they can have their babies, because there would be uproar, and quite understandably. So, as Renee said, the government are taking a really bizarre approach to what they have done in the 5 years to date by specifying, literally, we have to bring documents with us to show where this baby was conceived, how it was conceived, where this baby was born. It's just ridiculous to take this invasive approach into people's private decisions to have babies. And then from my perspective as a gay dad, I was at a couple of meetings at the end of last year with Simon Harris, the Minister for Health, together with Renee and the Equality for Children campaign. And I specifically told him the story about my family. And he said, well, look, I'm really sorry, Garode, but because your children were created through an international surrogacy, and remember, I had no choice but to do that because our clinics would not and could not help me. He said, your family will probably never, ever be protected properly. I don't see, his words were, I don't see a pathway to allow them to have the legal protection. So I was gobsmacked by that. And I was really dejected because he was the senior government minister responsible for this legislation. And to hear that coming from his mouth was just really, really disappointing. So there is talk, as Renee has mentioned, about another piece of legislation that will encompass equality for more families. But again, as Renee said, the government are taking the perspective that they want to rule on how the children will be conceived, where they will be born, before they will allow us the equality for our children that everybody else gets automatically. So there is no timeline. And in my case around being a gay dad, there's actually no pathway envisaged. So yeah, it's pretty despondent right now.
And what I love about your campaign, and I think it's a credit to Equality for Children, is that you're not going to stop your fight until every single family are covered. And, you know, that is an absolute credit to the group, that, you know, the majority of people may be covered by one piece of law, and then we move on to the next piece, and then another bulk will be done. But then, Garode, in your particular case, you've been told that there's no pathway. So it's absolutely correct and right that Equality for Children would make sure that every family are equal before you put down your, I don't know, before you stop screaming and posting and getting all over social media and press releases and whatnot. So thank you so much for that, guys. Garode, I have a question for you, and actually it's come up a little bit in Slido and through the WebEx Q&A and also in chat. People really want to know, what can they do to help you guys?
Thanks for That's really positive to hear. There's loads people can do. So we are a volunteer organisation. We need people with all sorts of skills. I mean, at the moment we have people who are accountants helping us to set up our group as a charity. We have people who are helping us with social media. We have people who are helping us with connections in the media to get interviews. So no matter what your skill set is, and even if it's just that you have time, it would be brilliant if you contacted us to offer to become part of our campaign, and we'll find a role. Absolutely, there's loads of roles that exist. We're a relatively small group. We have a website, equalityforchildren.ie. We're on Facebook. Again, we're at Equality for Children, all one word. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter, and it's always just Equality for Children, all one word. So if you want to get in touch with us to offer your skills or support, that would be really brilliant. If you want to help us financially, we have a GoFundMe page, and I'm asking you, Seamus, maybe to send that out later. The big thing that we need to do really to fix our situation is to lobby politicians. As I mentioned briefly earlier, we don't need a referendum to solve this. It just needs the government to put some focus on it. And I know they have lots of priorities right now in areas, but it basically needs a government minister to champion this in order to enact the legislation needed to protect all of the children. So the big thing that people can do is, if you have a political connection, either talk to them directly on our behalf or introduce us to them, so that we can work our way through the network required to get access to a government minister who can solve this problem. That's ultimately what we're trying to do. That's why we're trying to make as much noise as possible and get as many publicity slots as possible. So if you can come forward to help with the campaign, brilliant. If you can donate, brilliant. If you can introduce us to a politician, that'd be brilliant as well.
Super, thank you for that. I popped up some of the links to the various websites, guys. So if anyone hasn't got those in the chat, just message me privately. Moving on then, just to some of the other questions coming through on Slido. In the north of Ireland, is the situation the same, or how is it in comparison to the Republic of Ireland?
So the situation is entirely different in the north, which is bizarre. You would think that it would be similar or even worse, given that we had marriage equality way before they did. We actually had a call with an organisation up in the north last week for Belfast Pride, to discuss kind of issues around LGBT parenting and how it differs in the north to in the south. And in the north, they have much more progressive laws, and in most situations, LGBT are fully protected. There would be a couple of situations where there might be some tricky legal issues, but for the most part, if you are in a relationship when you now I mean, they still have issues around surrogacy arrangements that they're working on, but for the most part, both parents can have a legal connection to their child. I think they're still working on fix. Seamus, or sorry, Grode, you probably know more about this. The issue of the parental orders. Maybe you could say that. There's kind of a gap between when the child is born to the time that the intended parents would be granted the parental order. So there is a bit of a kind of grey area of time where they might not be fully protected. So Grode, perhaps you could.
Yeah. So the situation in the north of Ireland is dictated by UK law. So in UK law, when the child is born in a surrogacy arrangement, this is, the woman who gives birth is assumed to be the mother, and she must be placed on the birth cert. The biological dad can go on the birth cert at that point, assuming that the surrogate is not married. If she is married, she must put her husband's name on the birth cert, the same as here in Ireland. But there is a process in all of the UK, including Northern Ireland, whereby the intended parents, in other words, the gay dads, can make an application with the consent of the surrogate for that initiative to be dissolved, and a parental order is then issued, allowing for a new birth cert to be created with both fathers on the birth cert. So that's obviously a far superior situation to what we have here in Ireland, where the initial birth cert can never be dissolved. The ideal would be, of course, that all of this would be sorted out in advance so that there would be no need for a parental order to be executed 6 months after the birth of the child. But the situation in the UK is much, much superior from a surrogacy perspective to what's here in Ireland, because the family unit with both gay dads can be recognised at a 6 month stage through a birth cert.
Thanks for that, guys. And that kind of leads me on to the next question that came through, and it's around adoption and fostering in Ireland. So what is the current situation for adoption and fostering in Ireland for gay or LGBT couples?
So,
go ahead.
Okay, so a gay couple are treated, okay, we've talked about the adoptive leave piece, which is huge and really important, but from the point of view of the application, a gay couple are treated in the same way as any other couple. They can apply to be approved in order to proceed with an adoption. They have to apply through TUSLA, they have to be vetted, they have to provide references, they have to provide various different reports showing their suitability to be adoptive parents. And at that point, they can make an application once they are approved to actually adopt a child. Ultimately, before the child is adopted to a gay family, the biological mother will typically be asked to give final approval for the child to be placed with a gay family. But from every other perspective, but that would apply in all situations where the mother would be asked, is it okay to adopt your child into this particular family? So generally speaking, gay couples are treated equally, but from the adoptive leave perspective, as Seamus has outlined, they're not. They're completely treated unequally.
Yeah.
Just to mention, for me, we did as a gay couple look to try and adopt a child here in Ireland, but it's a positive, suppose, reality is that very few children within Ireland are actually placed for adoption. Most couples who do adopt here in Ireland will go abroad to adopt their children. And as a gay couple, many of the countries where children are typically adopted from will not allow or tolerate an adoption to a gay couple. So from our personal perspective, we did look at adoption here in Ireland, but it wasn't going to be a reality for us because Ireland would be the only country that we could do the adoption in, generally speaking. The US, of course, is an option, but the number of children being adopted every year is thankfully quite low. So we just felt that domestically adoption would be very difficult for us.
And with regard to fostering, I'm hosting an event in a couple of weeks' time to talk about fostering, in particular for the LGBT community. And I know that they are crying out for foster parents at the moment. There is a massive shortage of parents, and it's fully open to all people of all sexes and genders and sexual identities and circumstances. And if you have a safe and loving and stable home environment, whether you're a single person or you are a gay couple, whether you have children, you don't have children, if you have a safe and loving environment and you can provide stability for a child, I know that they are very much looking for foster parents at the moment.
Great. Renee, if you wouldn't mind, I might get you to send the details of that event to me so then I can share it with our participants afterwards. Yep. Loads and loads of questions. I'm just going to pick a couple more because I know that we're nearly coming up on time. So this one is to do with heterosexual couples. Let's give What is the current legislation for heterosexual couples who opt for surrogacy via an international organisation, and are those children also in the same situation?
I'll let Garode answer that.
Yeah, so I'm part of lots of surrogacy networks and talk all the time to heterosexual couples who are in the position, for whatever reason, where they can't have the children themselves, where they go abroad. Depending on the country that they go to, the situation differs. So let me just give you two examples. If a heterosexual couple have their children through surrogacy in the United States or in Canada, the heterosexual couples will both be immediately placed on the birth certificate. So they will return to Ireland with their new baby, regardless of the baby's genetic origin, and they will have a birth cert that states that they are the parents of that baby. That birth cert will be issued by the United States or by Canada. When they come back to Ireland, they won't face any of the difficulties that we speak about, because when they go to register their kids at school and they have this birth certificate, nobody's going to assume that this baby was born through surrogacy, because they look like a regular family, for want of a better way of putting it. So in the United States and Canada situation, the birth certificate includes both intended parents, the intended mother and the intended father. Another very popular option for couples is to go to the Ukraine. But in the Ukraine, the surrogate must go on the birth cert, and the Irish dad must go on the birth certificate. And he then must prove to the Irish government, in order to be able to secure a passport, that he is the biological dad. And those tests are DNA tests that take a couple of weeks. So the couple is left overseas, kind of in limbo, without a passport for their child to return to Ireland. And when they come back to Ireland, they too are in the same situation that we're in, where the child's biological dad, the Irish man, is on the birth cert, but the Ukrainian surrogate is listed on the birth cert, so that the Irish mother doesn't appear anywhere and is in the exact same situation as a non-biological dad in a gay relationship.
Wow. And the changes that you're trying to bring, I guess, through equality for children, do you hope that that will also be addressed as part of your Still Not Equal campaign? So you're not specifically looking at LGBT families, you're also looking at heterosexual as well.
100%, because what would be the good of our campaign for only to, the whole point is that it is equality for all children, regardless of the sex of their parents, whether they have gay parents, they have straight parents, it doesn't matter. No child should be treated. So yes, 100%, we'd be looking to include all types of setups and arrangements with what we are fighting for. So yeah, 100%.
And just to add to that, I mean, a lot of heterosexual couples, we all have friends who are struggling to have kids. When you talk about creating families, as I do quite a lot of my friends who are heterosexual come forward and say, well, actually, we struggled for years to have our kids, and we did look at all of the options, including going abroad for IVF, or including international surrogacy or whatever. And our government are really, really slow in acting on this, because there's loads of couples out there who are heterosexual or gay who want to have kids, but they can't because they don't have the funds to go abroad. We were lucky, we had the money, we found it. But there's loads of couples who are not in that position, so they can't afford to go to IVF clinics outside the country. They can't afford to do international surrogacy. So our campaign is trying to help everybody, because it's wrong that when you're in the situation where you're dealing with infertility, for whatever reason it has occurred, that you also have the added layer of complication of being forced abroad, whether you're heterosexual or homosexual. And so for heterosexual families, having their kids in Ukraine must be so stressful. Having their kids in an overseas jurisdiction must be so stressful, or even doing their IVF in an overseas jurisdiction for whatever reason. It's already bloody complicated enough without adding all of this other language barrier, political barrier, or financial barrier.
Absolutely. I think upheaving your life, you know, whether you're heterosexual, homosexual, identify as any part of the LGBT plus network, you know, having to upheave your life and move to a different country for a period of time is pretty scary. So thanks for that. I'm going to group just two questions here. So why do you think the government are not more supportive of putting the legislation in place? And what is the, sorry, one of the other questions gone on me. Yeah, so basically, oh, sorry, here it is. So why is there a delay in passing the legislation? And is there a way the legality of guardianship in the interim could give you some comfort?
So just to speak to the guardian question first, yes, a non-biological or a non-birth parent can become a legal guardian, but currently you have to wait for 2 years before you can apply for this. So there's a 2-year period where you have just nothing. We don't have guardianship because for our first child, she wasn't allowed because she wasn't 2. And then when our second child was born, we didn't want to have guardianship for one child and not the other. So if we get to a point where they're both eligible to have a guardianship order granted, we may go for that. But at the moment, we don't have it for either of the children. So, and that goes for all parents in that situation. Can't apply until your child is 2. Even once you do get a guardianship order granted, it is not the same as being recognized as a parent. That relationship will be ended when the child turns 18. It can be revoked. It can be challenged. It has all sorts of other issues to go with that. So yes, it is a bit of a stopgap for some people, but it's not, again, it's not good enough, and it's not the same as being granted a legal parental connection. With regards to why they haven't happened sooner and why it's taking so long to get this legislation, to be honest, I think it's not necessarily, you know, some people would think, oh, maybe it's like a deep-rooted homophobia within our government. But to be honest, I think it's just not big enough an issue for them, and it's lack of motivation, it's lack of needing to get this done. We're such a small community as it is, and then the families who are not recognized, it's almost like we're a minority within a minority, a micro minority. I don't know if that's a word, but it is now. And it's such a small group of people, and people also don't know that this is happening. You know, with marriage equality, the whole country knew, the whole world knew, and was behind us, and there was huge support. With this, people kind of think that we finished and we got equality, but really we have unfinished business with marriage equality, which we need to finish. So that's a huge part of what we're doing, is just trying to raise awareness so that people know that this is happening. Because I think with the majority of people, when they hear that this is happening, they're completely outraged and can understand why this is so important and why this is so unfair. But yeah, I think it just hasn't been done up till now because the political will has not been there.
If I could just add there to the guardianship points that Renee made, the point of having to wait 2 years is a really big deal, because, you know, a lot of medical stuff happens in the first 2 years. So the non-biological parent cannot bring his or her child to vaccinations. A lot of kids are prone to falling over and ending up in A&E in that first 2-year period when they're learning to go from wobbling to toddling to walking. In that situation, the non-biological parent should not turn up at the A&E unit with their child. And then, as Renee said, it's dissolved at 18. So when the parent, the non-biological parent, becomes an old person and they themselves needs care, their child has no right to actually look after their parent in old age or request medical treatment on their behalf. So it kind of goes full circle. So guardianship is an alternative, but it's a vastly inferior one. And really, does any parent want to be referred to as their child's guardian? No, you just want to be referred to as their parent, but ultimately it's not about us, it's about the kids. And guardianship puts kids in grave danger for 2 years because they literally are being brought up by a complete legal stranger. And it doesn't protect them when they become adults then, because they have no legal relationship with their parents, so they can't inherit money, they can't look after their parents in old age. So it's vastly inferior.
I think what the underlying message I'm getting here from both you guys is get the message out there as best you can. Follow Equality for Children on Instagram. Follow all of the links that I provided. I will definitely be sending a follow-up email, both with those websites and links, your GoFundMe page, and also, Renee, that event that you're planning on having around fostering. One very last quick question, and I know it's something that will be quite burning in our FuSIoN members' minds at the minute, is around donations. So can companies donate to Equality for Children? And then as a follow-up question, is Equality for Children now a registered charity?
So we're in the process of putting in an application to become a registered charity. We set up as a non-profit, so we're just a limited not-for-profit company, fully volunteer-led. No one is getting paid, no one is getting anything out of doing this, and everyone is giving of their time freely. All donations that we have received so far and continue to receive, very gratefully, are going towards printing material and any other kind of overhead costs that we need, upkeep of websites and social channels. And so yes, people can absolutely donate, and we would be very grateful for that. There will be lots of things that we need to put money towards in the coming months and over the next year. And yes, we would be very grateful for anything. And you know, if you can give the price of a cup of coffee or share the GoFundMe link within your own circle, we'd be very grateful.
Super, thank you for that. I think just from knowing some of our companies, to actually have a group like yourselves registered, it needs to be a full charity. So hopefully the sooner that you guys get that through, the better, and we can start.
Yeah, they're working on it at the moment.
Absolutely. But I mean, in terms from a personal perspective, there is no problem with people joining your GoFundMe page and making a donation there.
Yeah.
Or encouraging your staff to do that. So nice note to wrap up on. Again, everyone, I'm going to share the links via email after the event. I'm going to share that fostering event that Renee is going to run. But I'm just going to take this opportunity to thank Renee and Garoj from Equality for Children. This has been a really, really informative chat for me. I wasn't aware actually of the level of inequality. So you've certainly stirred some fire in my belly at the minute. And if there's any way that myself or the FuSIoN Network can help you out in the future, please do feel free to reach out to us, and we're more than willing to assist.
Thanks so much.
So thanks for joining, guys, and thanks for everyone who participated, and we'll talk to you all very soon.
Thanks a million.
Cheers. Bye.